Hey everyone, it's Albert Lee with Cleverkey Consulting Group. These last few months of the COVID-19 era has significantly impacted businesses all over. But not only have the businesses been impacted, from CEO to frontline employees, the people who work in those businesses have been impacted as well. While my team is busy creating a series of business spotlight videos, we decided to create a special series of videos geared toward people and the struggles they might be going through. I'm lucky enough to have my good friend, Dr. Andy Garrett of AG Thrive, collaborate with us to explore the different topics that might be affecting people, especially when it comes to work and the workplace. Dr. Garrett holds a doctorate in clinical psychology, and he has extensive experience in life coaching and personal development. Please join us in this series as we explore all kinds of topics that are affecting people with work and the workplace. If you have any comments or questions or topics that you want us to explore, please feel free to comment below. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy this. Dr. Garrett, thank you so much for spending the time with us, and thank you so much for collaborating with us to discuss some possible challenges that we may face in the workplace. Today, I want to talk about work-life balance. How does that sound to you?
I think that sounds great. So I'm excited to be here and have this conversation with you.
Cool. Well, I think a lot of people have an idea of what work-life balance is. Can you tell us what you define work-life balance is?
Yeah, I think work-life balance is just recognizing that there are other sources of meaning in life other than work. And so needing sometimes to put a clear boundary between work and those other sources, whether it be family, exercise, self-care, work life, spiritual life, whatever that is. And so making sure that, that you are intentionally, recognizing these roles and then committing to spending time to those. I want to say that concept came out of, kind of Gen Xers, in their reaction to seeing their parents and baby boomers, having very little work-life balance. And so, wanting to have PTO, wanting to, be able to have breaks that help them to deal with the stress of work in a more meaningful way.
So, Dr. Garrett, how do I know if my work-life balance is imbalanced?
I think some of the most clear signs of that are going to be, initially there's probably some frustration. We know there's a sense of efficacy when you start to feel like that you're not being effective, you're not making a difference, you feel stress is starting to accumulate. Burnout is one of the biggest signs of that. And I think as a leader, you want to try as much as you can to head off before your employees get to, burnout. But I know burnout in particular and stress-related health issues in the workplace are responsible for about $150 billion a
Wow.
year of lost wages or lost income. And so it's a huge issue. And you certainly should start to see, there's sleep issues, stress, irritability. You're just going to notice that someone seems maybe a little more on edge, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to talk about work-life balance through maybe a couple different lenses. The first is through a leader's perspective, and then I want to talk about work-life balance through like your typical employee's perspective. Let's first start with through a leader's perspective. So, as a leader, how do I know if I'm doing enough to promote work-life balance?
Yeah. And so I think what's really important as a leader is to facilitate open communication. And I would say, I feel like sometimes you need to kind of rewind a little bit. And one of the most important things you can do before you even have someone working for you and have the potential for burnout is be very intentional in the selection process of who you're hiring on. So to be aware of what is the type of culture I want to create as a leader, right? What are the values that this company really stands for, and are we being consistent with that? And are we hiring people, right, that really align with those values? If you are hiring people that clearly don't align with the company values and the values of of leadership, the likelihood that you're going to see burnout goes up exponentially. I think Ray Dalio has a great quote about that if we tend to fight for it against our values, and so he often says that he thinks of values first when he's hiring people before skills or anything else. And so I think that's an important thing to think of even in the hiring process, and then be aware of, are you encouraging communication with your employees? Are you checking in with them? Are you aware of what's going on in their personal life? Not that you necessarily need to be their best friend, that's not the issue, but making sure that they know you care about them as a person and not just as a productivity machine or a profit machine. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. So speaking of that, as a leader, we have the responsibility of driving organizations to goals and down particular paths. How do I respect the concept of work-life balance when I might feel that my employees aren't doing enough to achieve those goals on behalf of the company? How do I respect work-life balance?
Yeah, I think a great question. And I think, one, as a leader, it's good to be self-aware, right? So what are the expectations you have for yourself, right? Do you have an identity that's completely wrapped into work, right? And so is your identity all about, getting a certain outcome, winning? Is it all about, being really good at your job? I think the issue with that, if that is, really your main source of identity, the likelihood you're going to have balance is very unlikely, right? And so making sure you have kind of a well-rounded sense of identity, that who you are is more than work, right? It's, not that I need to get into everything identity is, but and then making sure, if you're aware of your own expectations, are you projecting those onto your employees or the people that you're leading, right? And recognizing that each person, what motivates them, understanding, how to really get the most out of them is going to be important to understand their specific motivation, right? Like, what is it that really gets them, fired up? What do they love about their job? What gives them a source of meaning? And so it does require some, ability to really understand each employee, or at least understand enough about them that, like, what lights a fire under them. And it's probably not the same thing that does light a fire under you as the leader.
Okay. As a leader, I have this responsibility, and I feel that the responsibility is greater than my subordinates. They have responsibilities too, but ultimately, I'm steering the ship, and I know they want to do, a great job. I just want to make sure that as a leader, I'll know if I'm effective in fostering a good working environment for my employees. But let's talk about, through an employee's perspective. Right now, for the past several months during this COVID era, a lot of employees are at home. They're working from home. How could employees at the line level achieve work-life balance when maybe they don't have a dedicated home office or they have small spaces? How could they achieve work-life balance working from home?
One of my initial thoughts as you asked that question is making a little bit of a distinction that I think is significant in the way we think of work-life balance. And there's another concept that's come up that's a little more recent that's called work-life integration.
Okay.
Right? And that has to do where work-life balance kind of sees work and life as like separate entities. Work-life integration says that your work is a part of your life, and so ideally your work is a source of meaning, is a source of connection. And so when you think of it that way, you kind of seamlessly weave in work as part of your overall kind of quality of life. When I'm working with someone, one of the first things I do if they're looking for a new job, they're looking to pivot out of the job that they're currently in, is I say, before you even start looking, I want you to describe the ideal quality of life you want to create, right? Like,
okay.
How much freedom is important to you? Do you like routine and structure? So when they outline that first, it allows them to be more effective and successful in finding a type of work environment that's a great fit for them, right? I had a client, recently who's an engineer and really does not like structure, and his company was pretty rigid, right? It's not rigid, but they just, they didn't have a lot of flexibility. They wanted people at 9, and they wanted people to leave at 5.
Okay.
That didn't work for him. Works for a lot of people. A lot of people love that predictability, right? And going through his values, like freedom and independence was like the most important thing. And so, now he's doing, is working, he started his own company, right? And interestingly enough, he wakes up way earlier when it's on his terms, right? He's waking up like 5 a.m., whereas before he couldn't make it to work at 9 a.m. At all. And so I think that's just really important to make sure that you understand, right? Like, what do you value and how does that line up? And to me, that's like that work-life integration, and being able to weave in. So if, working out is an important stress reliever for you, maybe it's that at lunchtime you join an exercise group, or maybe there's a group of people from work that you guys go together to go on a walk or something. So you're really integrating it, becomes part of one overall narrative as opposed to these compartmentalized separate pieces.
That sounds great, and I think as employees, we can strive to achieve that. But there's always another person involved, and that other person is always the manager or the leader. And if it's important to me, how can I safely push back on my managers when I want to achieve this work-life balance, yet I'm faced with someone's deadlines or expectations that are put on me? How do I deal with that?
Yeah, I think there's a concept that it's not necessarily the employee's responsibility to establish this, but I think it's an important concept that I at least want to acknowledge, and it's this idea of psychological safety, right? And we know that the highest performing teams, at least sustainably high performing, tend to have really high degrees of psychological safety, where everybody's input is valued, it's sought out, right? And people are able to report if there are issues, and the environment or culture supports, and there's like not retribution. So if you're going to point out, I think one of the original studies that really highlighted this concept was looking at hospital teams. And so they looked at the highest performing teams in hospitals, and many of them had the highest number of reported errors. So they were surprised actually when they found this. When they dug a little deeper to explain why that was the case, they realized it was because the team had the safety and had the freedom and comfort to be able to bring issues up as they came up, and they knew that they'd be addressed. They knew that they'd be respected and talked about. Some of the worst performing teams had the lowest number of reported errors, and it was simply because they didn't feel safe to bring it up, so issues never got addressed. The amount of turnover and the amount of stress and burnout that happens in teams like that is exponentially higher than the ones that have psychological safety. So I think as an employee, some of it you have to assess, right? Like, is this a safe environment for me to bring these issues up? Is there a designated person for me to bring this up with, right? Is it HR? Is it, is there a team leader? Who is that person that I can go and speak to? And ideally, to try and frame it, as like a collaborative, like how can we work to resolve this, as opposed to just, venting, complaining, things like that. I think the more you can have a solution-oriented mindset is really helpful.
Yeah, to that point, I think it's really interesting because, as employees or as leaders, I think we behave in siloed capacities. And when it comes to work-life balance, it's like, okay, well, I've just got to figure it out for myself. I got to figure out my own schedule. What you're bringing up sounds like, it really takes the leader and the employees working together in order to achieve, work-life balance or work-life integration. That's going to be beneficial for not just the line level employees, but for the leader and also the organization overall.
To supplement that or to reinforce that, we know that when someone is really stressed and they feel isolated, they feel alone, it physically changes how stress impacts them. As far as cardiovascularly, it constricts the blood vessels in your heart when you feel stressed and isolated. Not good to have that over a period of time in your heart. However, when you are stressed and you feel supported, you feel like you've got a network of support, you feel like people care, it releases a neurochemical called oxytocin, right? It's often referred to as the cuddle hormone, but it's also a stress hormone. And so it actually dilates the blood vessels in your heart, right? So the term full heart actually comes from that, which is really good for your heart. So literally, when we are stressed and we feel connected, we feel supported, stress can be healthy, it can be beneficial for us, but it can be extremely dangerous for us when we feel stressed and we feel like we have no support.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dr. Jared, I want to change up a little bit. Some people knew that I was going to do this video with you, and they've asked some pretty interesting questions that I want to pose to you if you don't mind. A lot of people sound like they're having some issues with comparing themselves to others, and those others may seem like they've got it together, they know how to balance everything, but themselves, they're just comparing themselves to others. How can we stop comparing ourselves to others that look like they've got the best work-life balance or integration.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge issue. And it's cool to do. I think if you're on social media a lot, it's hard sometimes not to, look at what is really a curated, kind of look at, someone's life. And so I think it's important to recognize that. So if that's where the comparison's happening, right, you're looking at someone's social media profile or the pictures they've taken. I remember a neighbor I had not so long ago that on his social media page, he was driving around in Bentleys and, going to all these amazing, locations. And I know he drove a Prius. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that, but his social media page was nothing like what his actual life was like. Right? And so I just think it's important sometimes to not take always at face value, right, what you're seeing there. And more importantly, like social comparison doesn't work on any level, right? So even if you are comparing yourself in a favorable light and you're saying, wow, I feel much better off than, these people, you will get a temporary hit of dopamine. It'll feel good for a moment. You'll feel maybe superior or you feel good, but the insecurity will kick in right after that because it just creates a sense of constantly comparing your self-worth by external things, by, comparing yourself to other people. So I would much, rather suggest for people that if, there's going to be any type of comparison as like a model of, where am I at? It should be self-comparison, right? Where am I at today? Do I have a plan for where I want to go? And am I making progress with that plan? Am I being the best version of myself, right? And I think it's, if I'm going to say that, I think it's important to probably define what the best version of yourself actually would look like and be like. So you kind of have some parameters to understand if you're hitting the mark, if you're in that area. And we know from self-worth, if I can make a comment on this real quick, that value, broad core values quite a bit. And I do think this is an important piece of really achieving work-life balance. But when you do values alignment, right, you do simple things like these are my core values and this is how they show up in my daily life and this is why they're important to me. Self-worth and self-esteem skyrocket. And so much so that we believe that self-worth should probably be rethought of as value alignment.
Okay. Interesting. So I'm going to ask you a question that's very personal to me. And I know that I'm a workaholic. I actually love working and achieving, but I also know from experience that it's not healthy. I've been diagnosed with high blood pressure and I'm on medication, and some relationships that I've had, which were great relationships, they just didn't last because I chose work, over that. At what point in time do I need to look at myself and say, you need to make a change? But Dr. Garrett, I preface that because I love working. I love achieving and accomplishing. At what point in time do I need to make a change for myself?
That is a great question. And I appreciate, first off, just, you sharing that. I imagine that's going to be very impactful for a lot of people to hear, because I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. And so, I think, my experience, we feel internal signals that tell us when we are off course, right? So I don't mean this to come off as like too, woo-woo or anything like that, but we will feel internal tension, we'll feel stress, and if we don't address them at an early stage, what tends to happen is they'll turn into physical manifestations, things like high blood pressure, right? And so some of that is kind of having a daily process of self-examination, right? So being able at the end of the day to say, hey, what did I do? What were the victories that I had? And where could I possibly improve? And, if work-life balance or work-life integration is something that's important to me, how did I do today? And to be really honest with yourself, and that might even require to some extent is having some type of accountability support group. Maybe it's someone that knows you really well that you trust, right? And they can speak into you and they say, hey, Albert, I love you, bud, but I see, I think you've been going at it pretty hard for this amount of days, and I know you well enough to see that I just feel like maybe it's time for you to take a break. And so I know for me, I have an accountability call with one of my best friends. We've been doing it for like 4 years, right? Okay. We do it every other week, and it's probably been the single most impactful source of growth that I've ever had in my life, other than being married and having kids. Right? And it's really helpful because we have the freedom to be able to say really honest things with each other. And we know it's said out of caring about each other. And so he will tell me if I'm off course. And sometimes he sees things in me that I can't see in myself, right?
Okay.
And so I think that can be a really significant and important thing to do because you love work so much, right? It's probably really easy to just kind of get tunnel vision and
Absolutely.
really get into it. And so it can be really difficult to see it. As you're asking that question, I was like, oh, that's a tough question, right? Because if you enjoy it, it's easy to justify or rationalize working a little bit more.
As you know, I have a consulting firm and a real estate firm and all these other side projects, and just part of my soul is accomplishing and making other people happy and things like that. But yeah, there are times where I'm like, oh gosh, how do I know that this is enough and is it sustainable? So thank you, for that. And it sounds like we got a lot of great information here, and I know that we can probably talk hours on end about the same subject. But Dr. Garrett, if you could, if we were to wrap this up, what would you want to make sure that our viewers take away? What are some of the most important things you want our viewers to take away from this?
I would say that self-awareness is really important in this entire process. So whether you're in a leadership position, whether you're an employee, is to be aware of, talk about core values. So being able to define what are those, right? And how are they showing up in my work and in my personal life? Because if they're not, I think it's going to be very difficult to achieve anything even remotely close to work-life balance. I think it requires the ability to understand, like, what are other sources? So, what would work-life balance look like? What are sources of meaning? And then can I effectively prioritize, right? So if I'm saying that my family is important to me, is that showing up in the way that I spend my time, money, and energy, right? And typically, if you don't schedule it, it's too easy to allow other people's priorities and sense of urgency, things that come up, to just take over. And so you have to really commit to, creating the quality of life that you want. In my experience, if you don't have these things pre-planned out in advance, it's really difficult. Life comes at you very quick, right? And people have constant streams of requests, and there's emails coming at you and information and news. All kinds of stuff. We live in an information age where we have more information coming at us by 10 a.m. than our ancestors did probably in a month. So it's really important to be intentionally planning, self-aware of who am I, what's important to me, what type of life do I want to create. It allows you to be really intentional then and moving forward in that direction. Without that, I feel it's like you're trying to hit a bullseye with a blindfold on, right? And you're just kind of randomly throwing darts. And that's usually what I hear people say, is that they feel like they're on a hamster wheel, right? I feel like every day I keep doing the same thing and I can't get off of it. You have to know what it is that you're trying to get off for to be able to create a different path. Well, great. Dr. Garrett, thank you so much again for spending the time and participating in this series. I'm really excited to keep continuing this and talking about different things that affect our lives in the workplace and through work, and I'm really looking forward to our next topic. Yeah, likewise. I think this is really fun. I enjoy these conversations, and I think it's so important and necessary and relevant right now to address some of these issues. So I appreciate you inviting me into this conversation. Great. Well, we'll see you on the next one then. Awesome.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. I sincerely hope you got value out of this, and if you did, please give us a thumbs up. And if you think that this information is helpful to anyone that you know, please feel free to share it. And if you have any topics that you want us to address, please comment below. Please check back with us because we plan on releasing content a few times a month. If you'd like to know more about our firm, you can visit our website at www.cleverkeyconsulting.com. And if you'd like to know more about Dr. Garrett and AG Thrive, you can visit his website at www.ag-thrive.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful day.